Watch this vidcast, or I'll gouge your eyes out.
Welcome back, Horror Hounds, to Ghostman and Rivera's Horror Show podcast.
I'm Mike Ghostman Pickle.
And I'm James Rivera. We have a lot to discuss today, some interesting B-movies as well as news, but before we get to the news, Michael has some new information for you.
You know, if you've been listening to the podcast, we have a feature film coming out that I wrote and directed called Pay Up. We finished the color correction and the sound design is almost finished. We almost have a final mix. So now we have a poster. We have an artist, Chris Barnes from Brutal Posters, is doing the poster. We have a logo. We have a tagline. And the tagline is, "Sacrificing his flesh may be the only way out." So that's the official tagline for the movie Pay Up, which will hit festivals this year. We're just entering it in right now.
Now we have to get to
Horror show news.
We start with Lee Whannell's The Invisible Man finally hits theaters, and it's getting early praise.
the new Candyman trailer has just dropped.
Ryan Murphy reveals the cast of American Horror Story Season 10, including the star Macaulay Culkin.
An orphan prequel is on its way to be titled Esther.
Chris Rock's Spiral from the Book of Saw has been rated R.
The controversial Hunting Humans film, The Hunt, gets a release date.
Shudder's Creepshow will air on AMC this year.
Robert Englund open to voicing Freddy Krueger in animated adaptation.
The main one everybody's talking about is Lee Whannell's The Invisible Man that hit theaters. Again, the synopsis is, when Cecilia's abusive ex takes his own life and leaves her his fortune, she suspects that his death was a hoax. As a series of coincidences turn lethal, Cecilia works to prove that she is being hunted by someone nobody can see. The critics are saying stuff like, it holds you in emotional vice grip, mostly because of Elizabeth Moss. Another one said it conjures lots of creepiness. Another one is a sly, twisty chiller. A lot of critics in consensus are calling it clever, well-acted, and scary. And it's almost universal praise for Elizabeth Moss. I'm not surprised on that.
I've been hearing it called a new classic. I love Lee Whannell. I really love what he did with Upgrade. I've liked his writing across the board, but I think as a filmmaker, he might be even better.
Yeah, he really came into his own as a writer and a director on Upgrade, and I really wanted to see what he followed that up with, and I'm glad this is getting early praise.
I'm excited to see it. So we'll be discussing it on the podcast within the ensuing weeks.
It just came out today.
Yes.
We're recording this podcast on Thursday.
The new Candyman trailer drops. This is probably the most exciting news this week. It looks really good. Mike and I have already watched it, but we're going to play it for you on the show right now.
Candyman. The urban legend is, if you say his name 5 times while looking in the mirror, he appears in the reflection and it kills you.
Who would do that? Candyman. Candyman.
Already looks creepy.
Bunch of girls standing in front of a mirror in a girl's bathroom.
Looks like a high school or something.
Well, we're still alive. Let's go.
Oh no, they're stuck in the bathroom now.
Gina, you broke the door.
Shouldn't have called his name forth.
Cool effect with bees.
Oh no.
This isn't funny!
Monkey Paw Productions.
Really connected to this.
This looks good already.
Cabrini Green. It was a project. I just moved in around the corner. The old candy tracks. I'm an artist. You look up a
So the star of it isn't initially Candyman.
He seems to be drawn to Cabrini Green though.
Yeah.
From producer Jordan Peele.
I'm hoping to spread the story all about Candyman. The mirror invites you to summon him.
Oh, he brings it in as a part of an art exhibit or something.
Candyman.
Or
Candyman.
Don't say that.
Yeah, don't say that again.
Ooh.
That's in like an art gallery setting. Looks cool. Get that hipster.
I think I made a mistake.
So he's starting to see himself as Candyman?
Yeah.
My guess is he's related, which would explain why he's drawn to the place. Dare.
Like he's getting possessed by him or something.
Dare to say his name.
To be another one of his terrible stories.
I guess he found me.
I don't think that's Tony Todd's voice. I know he's in it as Candyman.
Yeah.
Ooh, it looks gory too.
You are Victor.
This isn't real. It's not real.
Oh, that's creepy.
Using a lot of bee stuff in there. Yeah.
Candyman.
All right, you're starting it over.
Candyman.
Well, that trailer looks fucking awesome. I'm
Yes, it
really
is.
excited for it. It looks like a modernized take on the Candyman, and we know that it is a sequel, and Tony Todd is going to be returning as the Candyman. To what extent, I'm not sure, because he is quite a bit older, but he's the Candyman. They could keep him mysterious for a lot of the runtime.
Yeah.
My guess is that the main character, played by Yahya Abdul-Mateen, is somehow related to Candyman,
Yeah.
if I were to venture to guess. And the only reason I say it is because how on IMDb and Wikipedia the names were switching for a while. First they announced Yahya Abdul-Mateen as the Candyman. Then they switched his name to a different character. And then they announced Tony Todd is the Candyman. But I'm not sure if we saw him in this trailer. Correction, Yahya Abdul-Mateen is actually playing the infant that Candyman kidnaps in the original film. All the glimpses of Candyman go by really quick or from angles where you can't see.
Yeah,
very
they mostly show bees and the hook.
It looks very well filmed. The only thing I have to ask is, in the original, Tony Todd put dental dams in his mouth and had real bees in his mouth and was paid $1,000 per sting. So when you see all the bees flying out of his mouth in the original, those are real bees. I wonder if they're ballsy enough to do that again, or if they're just going to let the CGI do the work.
I know.
It is a pretty dangerous thing to ask of your actor, and it is asking a lot. I wouldn't blame anyone if they just went the CGI route for that.
It didn't. I didn't see any CGI or something that was noticeable as CGI in the trailer or anything.
It definitely has a Jordan Peele flavor to it. Was that a Red Band trailer?
I'm not sure. So it's most certainly a sequel now. We know it's a sequel and not a remake. All right, our next story is Ryan Murphy reveals the cast of American Horror Story Season 10, and that includes the star Macaulay Culkin. Culkin will be joined by returning regulars including Sarah Paulson, Kathy Bates, yes, Billy Lord, Leslie Grossman, and Evan Peters is back this time. Ryan Murphy announced the cast lineup in a teaser video that he posted on his Instagram account.
This is kind of perfect for Macaulay Culkin because as an adult, he's pursued a lot of strange roles, and he's in a lot of really offbeat indie films that aren't really seen too widely by the public.
Yeah.
I think most people still associate with him with Kevin McAllister in Home Alone.
It's good to see him get another project like this and put him back in the spotlight.
I always see his brothers in movies now, like Kieran Culkin. I've seen him pop up a lot, but you don't see too much Macaulay Culkin in mainstream films anymore. There's not much to say because we don't even know what the premise is. We don't know what it's about. The teaser that Ryan Murphy posted to his Instagram account is just some ominous music, waves on a beach, and a cast list. So it's way too vague to even speculate what they're going to be going for this season. But I did hear that they're interested in potentially stretching it out to 20 seasons. And it wouldn't really surprise me because it's a show that could actually do that, given the different types of horror that still haven't been explored. I don't mind. I don't feel that the show has gotten worse over time. I still like it.
Well, the music on the teaser reminded me vaguely of Twin Peaks.
All the cast members that sat out for last season for 1984 will be back finally. An orphan prequel is on its way to be titled Esther. The prequel to the 2009 film will tell the story of Esther. It's going to be directed by William Brent Bell, who also directed The Devil Inside, The Boy, and Brahms' The Boy 2. The film's writer is David Coggeshall. Wrote The Haunting in Connecticut 2, Ghost of Georgia, and Watch Over Me. This is the synopsis. Lena Klammer orchestrates a brilliant escape from a Russian psychiatric facility and travels to America by impersonating the missing daughter of a wealthy family. Lena's new life as Esther comes with an unexpected wrinkle and pits her against a mother who will protect her family at any cost. No release date announced at this point. Seems like an interesting concept. The only thing I have to ask is if they're going to be able to maintain the same level of suspense that the original did.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, it was a big twist, but by now everybody knows that the little girl was actually a grown woman. I don't know what angle they're going to take to keep it suspenseful this time around, since we're going to know up front who the character already is.
Yeah. I personally like The Devil Inside, and nobody else did. And The Boy was decent, so we'll see. All right, next story is another bit of news from Chris Rock's Spiral from the Book of Saw. It's been rated R, of course, that's no surprise. Quote, it's for sequences of grisly, bloody violence and torture, pervasive language, some sexual references, and brief drug use. And here's a synopsis. Working in the shadow of an esteemed police veteran, Samuel L. Jackson, brash detective Ezekiel Zeke Banks, played by Chris Rock, and his rookie partner, played by Max Minghella, take charge of a grisly investigation into murders that are eerily reminiscent of the city's gruesome past. Unwittingly entrapped in a deepening mystery, Zeke finds himself at the center of the killer's morbid game. Spiral is written by Josh Stolberg and Pete Goldfinger from a story by Chris Rock, and the release date is May 15th this year.
This is going to be really interesting seeing what Chris Rock brought to it, because he said that the only reason he was interested in doing a Saw movie is because he had a fresh take on the concept.
Yeah.
So I'm really hoping that with this Saw movie, it's going to break from the formula of the previous ones. Every Saw movie to me is just the same, the original Saw, with just trying to come up with creative new kills, grisly violence. I hope that they take the story in a completely different direction and turn everything on its head. I also like that Samuel L. Jackson's in this. He doesn't come out in too many horror movies.
And that Chris Rock's in it too, and that he's a really good writer. He's really clever. If he came up with something, a story that could revitalize this franchise, I think it's going to be good.
Chris Rock is also a good actor too. I know that despite being associated with comedy, he actually can do drama really good too.
Yeah.
And he's going to be playing a gangster on the upcoming season of Fargo, so that should be really interesting. A mob boss in Kansas City, I believe. So finally, the controversial Hunting Humans film, The Hunt, gets a release date. Remember we reported about this on the podcast last year. We watched the trailer for it, and then a week after we had to report that it was canceled because apparently Trump made some fuss over it and was whining and bitching about it, saying it was offensive, even though he didn't really know shit about it.
Yeah, that was some bullshit that they pulled that. I'm really glad that they're still releasing it.
After the political controversy forced Blumhouse to pull it from theaters last year, Universal has finally given a release date to the film. It's going to be Friday the 13th this March, and that's a great release date. The film's new ad campaign seeks to emphasize the controversial nature of the film. It's a pretty smart marketing move. Controversy sells, everybody likes a little bit of a scandal.
Yeah.
So just trumpet that all over the trailers, all over the poster, that the movie that nobody wanted you to see, the movie the president didn't want you to watch.
Yeah.
This is the synopsis. 12 strangers wake up in a clearing. They don't know where they are or how they got there. They don't know they've been chosen for a very specific purpose, the hunt. The film is written by Damon Lindelof, who was one of the writers on Lost and created the excellent HBO series The Leftovers and last year's Watchmen, and also written by Nick Cuse, who also worked on Watchmen with Damon Lindelof. It is going to be directed by Craig Zobel, one of the directors of The Leftovers. I'm really looking forward to this. Damon Lindelof has a very fascinating style of writing. It's very intricate, it's very layered, and there's a lot of complexity to it. Give The Leftovers a chance if you've never seen it on HBO, and last year's Watchmen was really spectacular. I loved it. It'll be interesting to see what he does in a horror movie, his style of writing.
The people that are captured, they're small town poor people, like conservatives. And then the people that kidnap them are wealthy
Liberal
elites, right?
Disgraceful.
Which I find kind of fascinating. You think that message would have appealed more to Trump?
All right, Shudder's Creepshow will air on AMC this year. Shudder COO Ed Carroll said this week that we think that Creepshow will be successful on AMC, but will also then build audiences for the Season 2 launch back on Shudder. This was reported by Deadline. Given that AMC owns Shudder, this isn't a huge surprise, and no date has been confirmed.
It's a smart way to try to grow the audience, and honestly, I really wasn't surprised either. I know that Shudder's deep connection with AMC means that something like that was bound to happen anyway.
Yeah, so it would air live on AMC and then later be available on Shudder.
For a second season?
Yeah.
Maybe. I'm not sure. It seems like they're putting the first season out right now. What they're going to be doing is putting the first season out on AMC to try to promote it on Shudder.
Oh, I see.
So I don't know if they plan to keep it as a permanent AMC series. I don't know if that's necessarily the smart move, only because it's supposed to be a Shudder exclusive and it's a reason for people to subscribe to the platform. It's something that you would assume would draw more subscribers. So I would imagine that they're just using the first season to try to get more people excited for the second season when it becomes only available on Shudder. But then again, this is just my speculation based on what I think. None of that is confirmed. It's what I think is going on. But yeah, from what I understand, the first season will air sometime this year on AMC. I imagine they might air it like a couple months before the new season comes out on Shudder to try to get some quick marketing going and to get excitement for it really fast. And finally, this isn't really news, just more of something I found interesting anyway. Robert Englund says he is open to voicing Freddy Krueger in an animated adaptation. Englund has stated over and over that he's too old to don the makeup again. He also revealed recently that he'd be willing to provide the voice for the character in an animated adaptation. In an interview with Sci-Fi This Week, Englund said, "Now, if they did a really expensive animated version, a graphic novel animated version, I would love to go do the voice for it. Yeah, that would be fun to do." So obviously we don't know if anything like that ever will happen, but it would be interesting, and I'd always be open to seeing Freddy Krueger again, even in animated form. Robert Englund can still do the voice to this day, though I get his reservations about not wanting to get into character again. But I think it makes sense that he'd be willing to provide a voice, because that's not as strenuous as having to get back into the makeup and do all the physical work that comes with acting like Freddy.
Yeah. Let's hope we get another Nightmare on Elm Street and Kevin Bacon is Freddy. I've been wanting that for a while.
Maybe Elijah Wood will helm it. Before we move on, one thing I do want to note is if they made an animated version of Nightmare on Elm Street or continued the series on an animated film, they probably would be able to get away with a lot more gore and violence than they would in live action.
Yeah, I have artwork like on the Spawn animated series.
I can see something like that happening.
Yeah, I picture some really detailed artwork like that.
Hi, I'm Elliot. You're listening to Ghostman Rivera's Horror Show podcast.
Mike and I are now going to discuss films that we saw recently, most of which were pretty much B movies. Some exciting, cheesy, gloriously bad, dumb, awful B movies.
Yeah, and these are almost always a lot of fun, no matter how bad they are. But sometimes they're just mediocre, as you'll see one of our
watches was very mediocre, forgettable, and I'm not looking forward to discussing it, but we're going to do it anyway.
The first one is one that I watched. It's Edge of the Axe from 1988, directed by Jose Ramon Larraz, but he was credited as Joseph Brownstein. He's actually a Spanish director, but he was credited as Joseph Brownstein. And it's about a masked axe-wielding murderer terrorizes a Northern California mountain town, and only a nerd and a mental patient can stop him. It opens with a great stalk and kill sequence in a car wash. You think it's going to be better from there, but then the cheese comes in pretty quickly.
Don't you love how absurd the premises for B movies are? It feels like the more ridiculous your premise is, the better it's going to be, or the more entertaining it's going to be.
It opens with that great scene, and you can tell right away it's actually late 80s, but it looks and feels really early 80s. The police are somehow cowboys. They're in Northern California, but they have cowboy hats, and some of them have like a southern accent. So it's basically California told through the eyes of a Spanish filmmaker. Mm-hmm. He didn't quite understand how life was in Northern California.
Probably makes it more unique, though.
And I like a lot of the kills, because there was a lot of... it was a really good fake axe. So the killer would pummel the people with the axe, so you could see the axe hitting them. And it was real looking enough where it kind of looked silly a couple times, but it ended up making the kills look more frenetic, because they actually showed the impact of the axe hitting them, so it was pretty cool.
You say it was cheesy. Does it seem like it was intentionally cheesy? Was it self-aware, or do you think it was cheesy just because it was cheesy?
Half and half. It was somewhat self-aware, but I think it was a little cheesier than they were going for, but still good and entertaining. Well filmed, it looked good. It was really gory with decent practical effects. Not the greatest, but
good enough, passable.
Yeah, not the greatest I've ever seen, but pretty entertaining.
Listen to this podcast, or I'll gut you.
What is our next movie?
This is one we both watched together. Rewatched Shopping Mall from 1986. Written and directed by Jim Wynorski. This guy is an interesting...
Character.
Yeah, he's an interesting director because he went on to do movies. Well, before this one, he did the Bear Wench Project 1 through 5, The Witches of Brestwick 1 and 2, The Breastford Wives, House on Hooter Hill, The Da Vinci Coed.
This sounds like porno movies. Like, you know how they used to take popular movies and then redo them as porn, like Edward Penis Hands and shit like that. That's what those titles sound like to me.
I think those was like B-movie smut, like borderline porn, but it wasn't. The Devil Wears Nada. The Hills Have Thighs. And
some of this is more recent, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, so he's been making movies for a while now, because Chopping Mall is pretty old, because when you mention some of these titles, I'm like, wait a second, those are like parody titles of movies that came out way after Chopping Mall.
Yeah. One of his more recent movies, I actually watched a big chunk of it. It's the Sharkensaw Women's Prison Massacre.
Oh man, that sounds fucking ridiculous.
But Chopping Mall is about young shopping mall employees hang out and have sex in a furniture store in the mall after hours. And then the new mall security robots go haywire and use their massive firepower to try to brutally murder them all.
I reviewed this on the podcast last year, so this was the second time watching it again. This movie is so fucking stupid. It's the typical... Everything about it is formula as far as the slasher element goes, except the premise is what makes it funny. The fact that that there's no slasher villain, that it's just a bunch of ridiculous robots with stupid catchphrases, adds an extra level of humor and self-awareness to the proceedings.
And it was like pretty cool remote control robots, like tooling around for the time. Like they were fairly impressive.
This is another one where, with a lot of B movies, I have a hard time telling how much of it's intentional and how much of it is just bad.
Yeah.
This one skirts the line between self-awareness and just being kind of bad.
Yeah.
But based on the other films that the director has made, the ones that you mentioned, I'm guessing it was all self-aware and the joke was on me.
Yeah. And Barbara Crampton was really good in this. She's always good. She's awesome, beautiful as always. But it didn't seem to fit her character when she became whiny and
She was
annoying.
almost too good in this movie for most of the portion.
But she had an awesome kill.
The kills in this movie are pretty funny. I think my favorite one still is when one of the robots blasts a woman's head and it pops like a zit in front of everybody. I couldn't stop laughing at that sequence. A lot of cheesy moments, a lot of ridiculous, typical what you expect. Teens having sex, getting horny, getting slaughtered, annoying douchebags, hot bimbos.
If these robots are just supposed to be mall cops, why do they have so much firepower? It's like machine guns, lasers, explosives.
Well, that's the great thing about B movies. You can completely throw logic and rationality at the door and just do whatever you want, no matter how absurd it is, or no matter how much it doesn't fit into the narrative or how little sense it makes. Anything goes in B movies.
Yeah. And did you notice in this one that the guys are the badasses with guns, and then the girls are the ones that try to hunker down and be clever and figure out a strategy? Except for Barbara Crampton, she was just whining.
Her acting seemed a little too good for everything that surrounded it.
Yeah.
One of the things that I most find annoying, and I had forgotten about this since I watched it last year, they have Dick Miller in it, the great character actor Dick Miller, and they trumpet his name towards the front. When putting on again, I was like, I don't remember Dick Miller in this movie, because they give him such a prominent name.
Yeah.
And then when you see him in the movie, you're like, oh, that's why I don't remember, because he's in it for 2 fucking minutes and gets killed off.
Yeah.
Has a couple cheesy lines and is whisked away really fast. I'm like, what a waste of a fantastic character actor right there.
Yeah. There's so many corny lines in this movie. Tons of corny lines, boobs, sex, gory deaths, laser blasts, explosions, the crazy burning death of you-know-who. An awesome scene with real snakes and spiders. I love that scene.
That was probably the most effective horror scene in the movie. Most of the movie just had me laughing or smirking at it. That scene actually got me uncomfortable. For one, I hate spiders, and the thought of being trapped around a bunch of with tarantulas crawling over you and snakes moving around gives me anxiety. So, one genuinely and anxiety-inducing scene. surrounded by complete nonsense.
Yeah. I actually love snakes and tarantulas and stuff like that. I even let tarantulas crawl on me, but that made my skin crawl because there was just too many on her, and there were snakes right there, and I was like, oh,
Untrained,
shit, that's real.
you don't know who they what they're going to do.
Overall, this wasn't as awesome as I remembered watching it as a kid, but it was plenty of cheesy goodness, and it kept it entertaining on a rewatch.
I wouldn't necessarily call it a good movie, but it's definitely an entertaining movie. And I think when it comes to B films, that's all that matters. You come there to be entertained, you come to laugh, you come to giggle at it all. You don't go there to get overly enveloped in a story or moved emotionally, and I feel like this delivers exactly what it sets out to do. I mean, look at the title, Chopping Mall.
Yeah, and Barbara Crampton alone being in it is worth rewatching again and again.
And if you're into 80s culture, like you're into the whole 80s nostalgia, you'll love it because the movie just reeks of the 80s. The hairstyles, the lines, the way they act, the music, the effects.
Yeah.
Complete 80s cheese from top to bottom.
Shut your mouth or I'll rip your lips off.
All right, the next one we watched was The Incubus, 1982. We weren't as impressed with this one. This was directed by John Howe, who directed Legend of Hell House and Escape from Witch Mountain.
It also has John Cassavetes as the star of the film. John Cassavetes was a legendary independent filmmaker, and he was also in Rosemary's Baby as that asshole husband, Guy Woodhouse.
Because of that, makes you excited just to watch this, and even more let down when it doesn't pay off.
I'll be honest, I don't really know what to make of this movie because I'm not sure how much of a B movie it is. There are qualities about it that are very B movie. Some of it seems very cheap. And on the other hand, there are sequences that are extremely creative, well directed, well shot. And some of them are so creative that it doesn't even really fit in or square up with the rest of the movie. The plot is ridiculous, but not ridiculous enough. It is about, as you can imagine, an incubus. And for those who don't know, an incubus is supposedly a demon. You okay there, Michael?
Yeah.
Is the incubus attacking?
I know, right?
Incubus is a demon that rapes women at night. It's silly, but it takes itself kind of seriously. There are some sequences that are really well directed and kind of creative, and they do some really interesting things with the sound design and the editing and the cinematography. And other parts are so mediocre and bland and tedious to sit through. Exist in this weird plane that makes it hard to satisfy on any level, if that makes sense. It's too serious to be a B movie, and it's too B movie to be serious. The scenes that are really well directed, or the creative sequences, I think only call attention to how tedious the rest of the movie was to sit through. Long stretches of this were really actually a chore, and I found myself fidgeting and checking my phone, which is not something I do when I watch movies, but this one really tested my patience. But I stood with it until the end just to see how it played out. It's a movie of moments, but it's not cheesy enough for what it is, and it should have gone a little bit harder if it was going to be as absurd as it was.
Yeah, because it started out with so much potential. It had a creepy atmosphere. It was nice camera work. There was a nice kill with a board with a nail in it.
There's hints of trashiness, of sleaziness, and then it's not sleazy enough for what it is.
Yeah, it meanders for a really long time without the story advancing. I think it's enough to just watch John Cassavetes running around trying to find out who this killer is.
And he's fine in the movie. He doesn't do anything to embarrass himself, but it's kind of a forgettable experience to me. I'd have a hard time recommending it to anyone because I think B movie fans are going to get bored, and people who like more serious horror movies are going to get irritated by it. So I'm not sure what the target audience for this film was.
I mean, it does have a handful of good scenes, and it's even a little scary at times. But
it is.
And it just drags and takes itself so seriously and without any excitement really going on screen. It was just
bad acting filtered throughout, but not campy enough. Just bad. I feel like if they were going to go for that, they should have really went for it. I just got the feeling the people who were not sure what they were trying to do or what they were going for most of its runtime.
Yeah.
It is what it is. For the curious, it's available on Amazon Prime in the U.S.
Listen to this podcast, or I'll cut off your genitals and feed them to your kids.
The next one we watched was much more entertaining and much more of a straight-up B movie. And this is new from 2018, The VELOCIPASTOR.
This movie was fucking stupid as hell. But it kept my attention. I could tell the stupidity was really intentional.
It's written, directed, and edited very well, by the way. Very well edited by Brendan Steer. And it's based on a mock trailer that he did back in 2011. The standout for me, the real star of this movie, is Elissa Kempinski. She plays Carol the hooker. She was really awesome in it. Really natural actress. She's beautiful. She's got that it factor. There's something about her. I got a crush on her right away watching it.
And
then, of
like
course,
Barbara Crampton in Chopping Mall, she seems a little bit too good by what she's surrounded by.
Exactly. I looked at James. I said, she's too good for this movie. She's too natural. As natural as she was, that's how over the top Greg Cohan was as Doug Jones, the VELOCIPASTOR.
Oh, but he was perfect for the role.
Yeah,
he was a total fucking cheeseball.
He embraced that cheese, dude. You know what it's gonna be because it opens up with it says "Rated X by all Christian jury."
Shut up.
And then you see a scene where a car blows up, and then we see it shows nothing, but it says just a text: visual effects, car on fire. So I see what we're in for this one.
And the way that it keeps cutting back and forth to the priest watching the car on fire, even though it's not really on fire, only heightens how ridiculous what you're watching is, because all you see is an empty area where a car should be, but it's not, and it just says visual effects, car on fire, and the editing flashing back and forth between him screaming and at just a blank spot is pretty fucking funny.
His devastated reaction, overacting, was hilarious.
It has a really cheap quality to it all across the board.
Yeah.
A quality that is so cheap that it cannot be anything but intentional. From as shitty as all the priest outfits, the pastor outfits look like fucking costumes, like they went down to the Halloween store and found the cheapest thing they could buy.
Yeah.
The collars look like shit. Everything looks disheveled. The camera work is kind of shoddy and it looks too digital. But I think that's part of the effect.
The decapitations were these mannequin heads being thrown around.
Oh, man. And, man, that was some fucking fake-ass gore effects. But so obviously fake that it's hilarious.
Shut up.
The pastor, the VELOCIPASTOR, he turns into... I guess he's supposed to be turning into a raptor, a velociraptor, but it looks more like a T-Rex to me.
Yeah.
It is the shittiest looking fucking dinosaur you will ever see. It's so obviously fake. It looks like rubber. It looks like something they're just moving around really cheaply. It has the kind of quality that you'd expect out of the goofiest Ed Wood film.
Yeah, it's got like a floppy head and foam teeth. It doesn't look threatening at all.
And it only makes it even that only makes it even funnier. One thing we had to do note is you mentioned the editing earlier. This is another thing that keys you in that the filmmakers are actually very talented. They're just doing something on purpose. The editing of this movie is fucking spectacular. It's inventive and with really amazingly creative flourishes. They do a riff on Brian De Palma's split screen, his script split screens that have been parodied to death.
Yeah.
But they formulate it in different variations. They use it to draw out the ridiculousness of it. And some of the transitions between the editing and all the split screens happening at once are really inventive and kind of dazzling. If you've ever done editing yourself, you know what difficult work it is.
Yeah.
Some of that shit really impressed the hell out of me.
It started out as a sex scene sequence, and then it turned into kind of encompassing the whole film, and you have all these picture in picture, and it's just a crazy effect. It's really cool.
Cornucopia of creativity in that sequence. So there's definitely a lot of talent going on here, but it's in the service of something outwardly stupid and outwardly dumb.
Yeah, and on top of the cheesy VELOCIPASTOR, you got your evil ninjas that laugh awkwardly.
I don't know. It seems so out of place with the movie too.
Yeah, and then these fake side stories with the fake war, and then they even go to one of the random ninjas, and there's a side story for him.
Oh my god, they go through a flashback or a side story for one of the villains and ninjas, and you see wartime, and it is the cheesiest, shittiest looking war. It looks like they just went out, threw on some fucking costumes really quick. Like, it's the fakest looking war I've ever seen in anything. Really ridiculous.
And those look like Halloween store outfits too. And to give you an idea what this movie is like, I'll give you some of the quotes from it. VELOCIPASTOR says, "I don't believe you. Dinosaurs never existed, and even if they did, I don't transform into one." when the older priest, Father Stewart, he says, "So your parents died, Doug. It's what parents do. They die on you." Oh, man. And when Carol says, "I don't know much about God," then Doug says, "I don't know much about dinosaurs." So that tells you what this movie's all about.
Listen to this podcast, or I'll stab your eardrums with an ice pick.
While we're on the subject of VELOCIPASTOR, we watched one that's arguably even cheesier. This one is Tammy and the T-Rex from 1994.
And this, I have to say, is the highlight of everything that we've watched. I would go so far to say, as B movies go, this is a masterpiece. It is the apex of everything that is glorious and ridiculous about B movies, done to its fullest extent. Fucking creative, really inventive, funny, and borderline surreal for how fucking stupid it is, but it's so committed to what it is that it's kind of intoxicating. It's ridiculously entertaining, and I wouldn't hesitate to recommend this movie to just about anybody. Even if you don't like intentionally bad films, I can't imagine anybody not being entertained by Tammy and the T-Rex.
This one was a blast. It was directed by Stuart Raffle, who directed Mac and Me, and he wrote Passenger 57. It's about an evil scientist who implants the brain of a murdered high school student into a mechanical T-Rex. The T-Rex then escapes to get vengeance on his high school tormentors and to reunite with his love, Tammy, played by Denise Richards. The guy with his brain in the T-Rex is played by young Paul Walker.
A baby-faced Paul Walker. So bizarre to see him in this role.
Yeah, and another standout in this one is Terry Kaiser as the mad scientist. He was in everything from Beretta, $6 Million Man, Hawaii Five-0, Hardy Boys, All in the Family, Three's Company, Hill Street Blues, Magnum P.I., Fall Guy, Knight Rider, and finally Friday the 13th, Part 7. And he was Bernie in Weekend at Bernie's. The director came up with the story when a South American theater owner had access to an animatronic T-Rex for 2 weeks. So he said, hurry up and write something and make a movie out of it. So that explains why the T-Rex looks so good in this. As bad as the Velociraptor dinosaur was, that's how good this one looked, and it actually moved.
That's what makes it really fascinating, is that the T-Rex actually, it's not on the level of something like Jurassic Park.
Yeah.
Let's not get that confused, but it's closer to approaching that than it is VELOCIPASTOR.
This movie was from 1994, but it was just released in its full gory version because all the gore was cut out of it for a PG-13 version. But Vinegar Syndrome just got hold of it, and they released it in November 2019 with all the gore put back in it.
So that's kind of like a new movie, too, when you think about it.
Yeah.
What I found funny about this movie is that for a good while you're watching it, you're not really sure if this is all intentional or not, because you're watching it and it's so bad in a way that's bizarre and really hard to put your finger on. You're like, this is bad, but you can't stop watching it. It's intoxicating, and after a certain point, it's the ridiculous happenings pile on one after another, and it becomes very clear that this is all a joke. This is all a put on. This movie was a fucking blast for me. I was laughing my ass off the entire runtime. I actually saw it twice. You saw it twice too, right?
Yeah.
Some of the best sequences in the movie are the ones involving the T-Rex's claws. Because if anybody knows what everybody likes to make fun of about the T-Rex is that it has such tiny claws that doesn't really have much reach.
Yeah.
There would be close-up scenes where you would see the head of the dinosaur, and claws would come up, stretching much farther than they would have the ability to. And it's so obviously that it's a costume. The T-Rex looks super realistic, but the claws that come out look fake as hell. There's a scene where the T-Rex picks up one of its friends and dusts his shoulders off with his claws. There's another scene where the T-Rex goes to a phone booth and starts dialing the phone, and it is so fake, though it's so obvious that it's just somebody with a costume dialing a number. I literally could not stop laughing through the entire runtime. All of the performances are over the top. Even the tiny background performances are over the top. Everything about this is pitched at such a high rate that it becomes kind of like laughing gas after a while.
Yeah, it seems like the director told even the extras to overact. Everyone was just going nuts in this movie.
The fight scene between Paul Walker and Denise Richards' ex-boyfriend,
Yeah.
the way that the students gathered around is unrealistic. For one, it's obvious school fights happen in school all the time and people cheer it on and shout, fight, fight, fight.
Yeah.
But the way that these high school teenagers were acting so ravenous and over the top and like screaming for blood.
Tell me if I'm right. The ex, Tammy's abusive ex, didn't he look like a broke-ass Corey Hart made love with David Duchovny?
That's exactly what he looked like. And another thing that I love about the movie is that the T-Rex, it's a fucking giant animatronic T-Rex. It's hard to miss. It goes out into open spaces in the public like it's watching over a high school party. It is in plain view. It's a packed party with a bunch of people on the dance floor. And it's so obviously there, and people even look in its direction, and nobody notices that the T-Rex is there. You're like, what the fuck, man? This is so unrealistic. And even though it was made in 1994, it doesn't feel like a 90s movie at all. The look of it doesn't look 90s.
No.
Nobody dresses like it's the 90s. The music doesn't sound like the 90s. It seems like they were trying to go back like 10 years and try to recreate the experience of the cheesy B movies from then. But even so, I think it's better than even the best of B movies because all of it is so intentional and it's really gleeful.
But it looked 80s without looking retro. It looked like it came from the 80s. I love Denise Richards' hilarious screaming and overacting.
So bad.
Oh,
Her
man.
falling down on the floor.
Yeah.
What about her best friend?
Oh, yeah.
The way that they played the trope of the gay best friend
Yes.
was so over the top.
He was a good character. He was entertaining.
I don't even know if I could call this a bad movie because to me, this is so gloriously creative and so batshit that it kind of transcends its own cheesiness and its own awfulness to reach something almost sublime.
Yeah.
That's the best way I could describe it. Like, I would actually give this movie possibly a 9 out of 10 or a 10 out of 10 if I would think about it because I had such a blast watching it. It does so well what it seeks to do, and it's hard to take your eyes off it through the entire runtime. And I feel like it's an easy movie to show anybody as a prank. Don't tell them what it is. Just we're going to watch Tammy and the T-Rex.
Yeah.
As ridiculous as the title is, it cannot prepare you for how ridiculous the movie actually is.
Yeah, and knowing that they put all their original gore back in, it's some really great gore.
That's what makes
I
it
mean,
even funnier is that the
some-
gore effects were good.
Yeah, surprisingly good decapitations. As bad as the VELOCIPASTOR decapitations were, that's how good these were.
I enjoy VELOCIPASTOR and it's funny, but I feel like Tammy and the T-Rex exist on a completely different level.
But we were talking about how bad the claws looked in Tammy the T-Rex. They looked real compared to the ones in VELOCIPASTOR, dude.
Oh yeah.
Shut up.
It's available on Shudder.
Yeah, this one's Shudder. And the gory scenes are some of them are half really good looking gore and half just hilariously bad effects. I read that the director ran around asking the cast and crew if they had anything better that they could add, and you could totally tell they were just throwing everything at this movie.
Really good time with Tammy and the T-Rex. A complete highlight. Highly, highly recommended to any B-movie fan or anybody who just wants to have a good time and be entertained. This is that movie.
You're listening to Ghostman and Rivera's Horror Show Podcast.
So that wraps up this week's B-movie discussion. As always, thank you so much for listening, and happy horror.
Horror.